She was mopping the hotel lobby at 3 a.m. when the billionaire saw his missing wife's photo in her locket, and he froze. The December wind cut through Manhattan like a blade, rattling the windows of the Imperial Hotel's marble lobby as Madeline Keaton pushed her cleaning cart down the empty corridor. At 20, she'd already spent 3 years scrubbing these floors, polishing these mirrors, and emptying trash cans that cost more than her monthly rent. The hotel's opulence never ceased to amaze her. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime, Persian rugs that felt like clouds beneath her worn sneakers, and walls adorned with paintings she'd only seen in art books at the public library. But tonight felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension she couldn't quite place. Maybe it was because Mr. Henderson, the night manager, had mentioned that some big-shot businessman was checking into the penthouse suite, the kind of guest who demanded absolute perfection and wouldn't hesitate to get someone fired over a smudge on a window. Madeline didn't care about rich guests or their demands. Her mind was on Clara, her twin sister who wasn't really her twin, a fact that had never mattered to either of them. Clara was home right now, probably curled up on their threadbare couch, trying to hide another one of her breathing episodes. The doctors at the free clinic had been clear. Clara's heart condition was getting worse, and without proper medical care, without surgery that cost more money than Madeline could dream of earning, her sister didn't have much time left. She touched the golden locket hanging around her neck, the only connection to her past. Inside was a faded photograph of an elegant woman with kind eyes, the only clue about where she'd come from. The nuns at St. Mary's Convent had told her it was found with her as a baby, along with some papers they'd kept locked away. She'd begged to see those documents countless times, but Sister Margaret always said the same thing. "When you're ready, child. When you're ready." The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 15th floor. Interrupting her thoughts, Madeline expected to see another hotel employee, or maybe a late-arriving guest, but the man who stepped out made her freeze in place. He was tall, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair that showed hints of silver at the temples. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weariness in his shoulders, or the haunted look in his deep brown eyes. There was something about him that seemed familiar, though she was certain they'd never met. Rich men like this didn't notice girls like her, but he was noticing her now. In fact, he was staring at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. His gaze had locked onto something around her neck. The locket. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That necklace. Where did you get it?" Madeline's hand instinctively moved to cover the locket. "I'm sorry, sir, but I really need to finish cleaning this floor. If you need anything, the front desk can..." "Please." He stepped closer, and she could see his hands trembling. "That locket. I gave one exactly like it to someone 20 years ago. It's impossible, but... Look, mister, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this belonged to my mother. I've had it since I was a baby." She started to push her cart past him, but he gently caught her arm. "What's your name?" "Madeline. Madeline Keaton now, if you'll excuse me." "Keaton." He repeated the name like he was tasting something bitter. "That's not your real name, is it?" Something in his tone made her stop. There was pain there, deep and raw, like an old wound that had never properly healed. "What do you mean? Of course it's my real name. I'm Richard Holloway. I own this hotel, and several others. But right now, none of that matters." He ran a hand through his hair, looking like he might collapse at any moment. "That locket belonged to my wife. Her name was Lillian." Madeline's heart started racing. "Your wife? But that's impossible. This locket has been with me since you were born." Richard's eyes filled with tears. 20 years ago, my wife disappeared during our honeymoon. She was pregnant with twins. Everyone said she was dead, that she drowned, but they never found her body. I spent years searching, but eventually, I had to accept that she was gone. The corridor seemed to spin around Madeline. "You're lying. The nuns at St. Mary said my mother died giving birth to me. They said, St. Mary's Convent in Queens." When she nodded, Richard closed his eyes. "Oh God, what did they tell you about your parents? About how you got there?" "They said I was abandoned as a baby, that someone left me at the door with some papers and this locket." Her voice was getting smaller with each word. "They said the papers were forged. that they couldn't tell who my real parents were. Richard leaned against the wall like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. Lillian was wearing that locket the night she disappeared. I had it custom made for her, with her picture inside. There's only one like it in the world. With shaking fingers, Madeline opened the locket. The photograph inside showed the same elegant woman she'd stared at countless times, wondering if those kind eyes had ever looked at her with love. This is my mother. If what you're telling me is true, then yes. But Madeline, if Lillian was your mother, and you're 20 years old. He stopped, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. You said you have a sister. Clara. She's sick. Heart problems. We take care of each other. Tears were streaming down her face now. Are you saying you might be... I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. Richard looked at her with desperate hope and terrible fear warring in his expression. But I need to find out. Those papers at the convent. We need to see them tonight. Madeline thought about Clara at home, probably wondering why she was taking so long. She thought about the bills piling up on their kitchen table, and the doctor's warnings about Clara's condition. She thought about 20 years of wondering where she came from, of dreaming about parents who might have loved her. I get off work at 6 a.m, she whispered. I'll wait. Richard pulled out his phone with hands that still shook. I'm going to call St. Mary's right now. Sister Margaret might remember me. I donated money there for years after Lillian disappeared, hoping that maybe someday. As Richard made his call, Madeline stood frozen in the elegant hallway, her entire world shifting beneath her feet. The locket felt heavier around her neck now, weighted with possibilities she'd never dared imagine. Somewhere across the city, Clara was waiting for her to come home with stories about rude guests and broken vacuum cleaners. She had no idea that by morning, everything they thought they knew about their lives would be shattered, and that the truth waiting for them would be more terrible and more wonderful than either of them could have dreamed. The December wind continued to howl outside, but Madeline no longer felt its bite. She was thinking about a woman named Lillian, about twins who should have been born into privilege, and about the mysterious papers that might finally explain why two sisters had spent their lives fighting just to survive. The morning sun cast long shadows through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Convent as Madeline and Richard sat in the austere waiting room. The familiar scent of incense and floor wax brought back memories of her childhood, memories that now felt like someone else's life entirely. She'd barely slept after her shift ended, her mind racing with questions that had no answers yet. Richard hadn't left the hotel when she'd clocked out at 6 a.m. He was still there, sitting in the lobby like a man waiting for salvation or damnation. He'd looked up when she approached, and she'd seen the same desperate hope in his eyes that she felt churning in her own chest. Miss Keaton, Sister Margaret entered the room, her weathered face creased with concern. At 73, the nun had been at St. Mary's for over 40 years, and Madeline had never seen her look so troubled. And Mr. Holloway, I remember you, of course. Your donations helped us through some very difficult times. Sister, I need to see the papers that came with Madeline, Richard said, standing up. His usual businessman composure was nowhere to be found. Please, I think she might be my daughter. The elderly nun studied them both for a long moment. I've been praying about this since you called. There are things about that night, things that never sat right with me. She sighed heavily. Follow me. They walked down a corridor lined with pictures of saints and former Mother Superiors, their footsteps echoing on the polished linoleum. Madeline had walked these halls countless times as a child, but today they felt different, like a path leading to truth she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Sister Margaret's office was small and cluttered, filled with filing cabinets that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 1980s. She pulled out a key ring and opened an old safe in the corner, withdrawing a manila envelope that looked yellowed with age. The woman who brought you here wasn't your mother, Sister Margaret said quietly, placing the envelope on her desk. She was well-dressed, spoke with authority, said her name was Mrs. Eleanor Davidson, and that she represented a family who couldn't keep their child. But something about her story felt rehearsed. Madeline's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. Inside were several documents. A birth certificate that listed her parents as unknown, a medical report stating she was healthy but premature, and a note written on expensive stationery, Richard leaned over to read the note aloud. This child's parents died in a car accident. She has no other family. Please ensure she receives a good Catholic upbringing. There is money in the account listed below for her care. The bank account was real. Sister Margaret continued. Monthly deposits came for 18 years, always from something called the Davidson Trust. But when I tried to research it, I hit dead ends. The woman who brought you, Madeline, she had the same eyes as you do now, and she was crying, even though she tried to hide it. What about Clara? Madeline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Did the same woman bring her? No, dear. Clara came to us 7 years later when she was 13. She was found on the streets, half-starved and sick. She couldn't remember much about her past. Some kind of trauma, the doctor said. But she had this with her. Sister Margaret pulled out another item from the safe. A small, tattered notebook filled with childish handwriting. Richard took the notebook with shaking hands and began to read. Mama's getting sicker. The lady with the mean eyes says it's my fault. I wish I could find Maddie. Mama said she has our daddy's eyes. The silence in the room was deafening. Madeline felt like she couldn't breathe. Maddie, she knew about me. It appears so, Sister Margaret said gently. When Clara arrived, she kept asking about a sister named Madeline. We thought it was just trauma-induced confusion, but she described you perfectly, right down to that locket you always wore. Richard stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders shaking. 20 years, he whispered. My girls have been alive for 20 years and I never knew. Mr. Holloway, Sister Margaret's voice was careful. There's something else. The Davidson Trust. Those monthly payments stopped exactly 3 months after Clara arrived here, as if someone wanted to ensure we couldn't afford to dig deeper into either girl's past. Madeline's mind was reeling. So someone separated us on purpose. But why? And where was Clara for all those years before she came here? I don't know, child. But I think it's time you ask Clara what she remembers. Sometimes trauma victims can recall more than they realize, especially when they feel safe. The drive back to Madeline's apartment was tense with unspoken fears and desperate hopes. Richard had insisted on coming with her, and she'd been too overwhelmed to argue. He'd rented a car, something expensive and black that looked completely out of place in her neighborhood. Clara gets nervous around strangers, Madeline warned, as they climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her tiny apartment. And she's been having more bad days lately, her heart. I'll be gentle, Richard promised. I just need to see her, to know if... Madeline opened the door to find Clara curled up on the couch, wrapped in the old quilt their foster mother had given them years ago. She looked so young and fragile that Madeline's heart clenched with protective fear. Maddie, Clara looked up with tired eyes. You were gone longer than usual. I was worried. Her gaze shifted to Richard, and something flickered across her face. Recognition. Fear. Who's he? Clara. This is Richard Holloway. He might be our father. Clara's face went completely white. She struggled to sit up, her breathing becoming labored. The man with the sad eyes, she whispered. Mama used to talk about the man with the sad eyes who loved us but couldn't find us. Richard dropped to his knees beside the couch, tears streaming down his face. Clara, baby girl, is that really you? I remember bits and pieces, Clara said, her voice growing stronger. A big house, a woman who was always angry. She kept saying we were mistakes that needed to be fixed. She looked at Madeline with wonder. And I remember you, Maddie. You had a locket with Mama's picture. Clara, where were you before you came to the convent? Richard asked gently. Can you remember? Clara's face scrunched up in concentration. Texas, I think. A ranch with horses and oil wells. The angry woman said we belonged to her now, that our daddy gave up his rights to us, but Mama said it was a lie. Her breathing was becoming more labored. Mama died when I was 13. That's when I ran away. Madeline grabbed Clara's hand, feeling how cold and clammy it was. Clara, you need to rest. This is too much excitement. But Clara wasn't finished. There were papers, she said urgently. Mama hid papers in. She pressed her hand to her chest, struggling for breath. I can't remember. But she said they proved we belonged to the man with sad eyes. Richard was already on his phone, calling for an ambulance. Clara's lips were turning blue, and her chest was rising and falling in rapid, shallow gasps. Stay with me, Clara, Madeline begged. holding her sister's hand tight. "We just found each other. All of us. You can't leave now." As the sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each passing second, Richard knelt beside both girls, his daughters, if the growing certainty in his heart was correct. He thought about a woman named Lillian who died giving birth to twins, about a mysterious ranch in Texas, and about someone with enough power and cruelty to steal 20 years from a family. But most of all, he thought about the angry woman Clara had mentioned, someone who believed these girls belonged to her, someone who might still be out there, waiting. The private investigator's office smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes, with framed certificates covering water stains on the walls. Marcus Webb had come highly recommended, the kind of man who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. At 62, he'd spent 30 years as a detective before going private, and his weathered face suggested he'd seen enough human cruelty to last several lifetimes. "Texas Ranch, you said." Webb leaned back in his creaky chair, studying the documents Richard had brought. Clara was stable in the hospital, but sedated, and the doctors had made it clear that her condition was deteriorating rapidly. Owned by someone connected to the Holloway family. "It has to be my mother," Richard said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "Evelyn Holloway, she never approved of Lillian. Said she was beneath our family's standards, but I never thought she'd—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Webb pulled up property records on his computer. Found it Diamond Creek Ranch, outside Austin. Purchased in 1985 by Holloway Holdings, LLC. Been in your family's name for 40 years. He turned the screen around. Aerial photos show it's pretty isolated. Perfect place to keep someone hidden. Madeline stared at the satellite images, her heart pounding. Somewhere in those buildings, her mother had lived and died. Somewhere in those fields, Clara had spent her childhood as a prisoner. "We need to go there." "Not yet," Webb cautioned. "If your grandmother is as dangerous as we think, we need to be smart about this. Let me make some calls first. See what I can dig up about the ranch's activities over the past 20 years. 3 hours later, Webb had assembled a file that painted a picture of systematic deception. Medical records showed regular visits from a private doctor who specialized in difficult cases. Supply deliveries included everything from baby formula to cardiac medications. Most damning of all were employment records showing a small staff sworn to absolute secrecy, all of whom had been paid generously for their silence. "I tracked down one of the former employees," Webb said, sliding a photo across the desk. "Maria Santos worked as a housekeeper there for 15 years. She's agreed to talk, but only if we guarantee her protection. Maria Santos lived in a small apartment in San Antonio, surrounded by pictures of grandchildren she clearly adored. When she opened the door and saw Richard, her face went pale. 'Dios mío,' she whispered. 'You look just like her, like Miss Lillian.' Tears filled her eyes as she let them inside. 'I prayed someone would come looking for her someday. Tell us what happened,' Richard said gently, though his hands were clenched into fists. Maria poured coffee with shaking hands. 'Your mother, she brought Miss Lillian to the ranch the day after your honeymoon was supposed to end. Miss Lillian was unconscious. Drugs, I think, Mrs. Holloway said there had been an accident, that Miss Lillian was mentally ill and needed special care. But she wasn't ill,' Madeline said. 'No, mija. She was pregnant and scared and kept asking for you, Mr. Richard. Mrs. Holloway had Dr. Peterson give her injections to keep her calm, but Miss Lillian fought them every day.' Maria's voice broke. 'When the babies came, Mrs. Holloway took one right away, said the little one needed special medical care in the city.' 'That was me,' Madeline whispered. 'Miss Lillian screamed for days when they took you. She begged Mrs. Holloway to let her see both her babies, but your mother said you had died, said Clara was all she had left. And even that was more than she deserved.' Richard stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, children played in a small courtyard, their laughter a stark contrast to the horror story unfolding inside. How long did my mother keep her there?" 20 years, Maria said quietly. "Miss Lillian aged so much in that place, the drugs, the heartbreak, the isolation, but she never stopped loving you girls. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd try to get Clara away from there." "What about her heart condition?" Madeline asked. "Clara's been sick since she was little. The stress, the medications. Dr. Peterson said it was genetic. but I think it was from living in that place. Miss Lillian had the same problems toward the end. Her heart just gave up. Maria wiped her eyes. She died holding a picture of you, Mr. Richard. Said she knew you were still looking for her. Webb had been taking notes throughout the conversation. Maria, what happened after Lillian died? Mrs. Holloway said Clara would stay and work as a servant, that it was better than she deserved. But Clara was smart. She overheard Mrs. Holloway talking about sending her away permanently, maybe to another country, so she ran. How did she survive on the streets for months before reaching the convent? Richard asked. She had help, Maria admitted. There was a stable hand, Jose, who felt sorry for the girls. When Clara ran away, he left supplies for her at different locations, helped her get to New York, but Mrs. Holloway found out and had him deported. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, each one more horrifying than the last. Richard thought about his mother's cold efficiency, her need to control every aspect of their family's image. But this was beyond control. This was pure evil. There's more, Maria continued. Miss Lillian, she was so smart. She figured out how to hide things from Mrs. Holloway. She wrote letters, made recordings when she could. She said if anything happened to her, Clara would need proof. What kind of proof? Webb leaned forward. Legal documents, medical records, even recordings of Mrs. Holloway threatening her. Miss Lillian hid them all over the ranch. In the walls, under floorboards. She made Clara memorize where everything was hidden, in case... Maria's voice trailed off. In case Clara survived and needed to prove the truth, Madeline finished. See, Miss Lillian was always planning for Clara's escape. She knew she wasn't going to live much longer, but she wanted to make sure Clara had a chance at justice. As they drove back toward the airport, Richard felt a mixture of rage and grief unlike anything he'd ever experienced. His wife had spent 20 years imprisoned by his own mother, watching their daughter grow up as a servant while believing their other child was dead. We're going to destroy her, he said quietly, his voice carrying a deadly calm that made Webb glance at him with concern. My mother took everything from us. Now I'm going to take everything from her. It won't bring them back, Madeline said from the back seat. Your wife, all those lost years. No, but it might save Clara, and it might prevent her from hurting anyone else. The plane ride back to New York was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Webb worked on his laptop, building a case file that would hopefully be strong enough to bring Evelyn Holloway to justice. Madeline stared out the window, trying to process the fact that her mother had been alive for most of her childhood, imprisoned and suffering while she was safe at the convent. But Richard stared at nothing, his mind filled with images of Lillian alone and afraid, calling his name while he searched uselessly for her body in the waters off Miami Beach. His mother had let him suffer for 20 years, believing his wife and children were dead while she played God with their lives. When they landed in New York, Richard's phone was buzzing with messages. The caller ID made his blood run cold. Mother. She knows, he said grimly. Somehow, she knows we're getting close to the truth. The cardiac unit at Mount Sinai Hospital buzzed with controlled urgency as monitors beeped and medical staff moved efficiently between rooms. Clara had been unconscious for 18 hours since her collapse, her heart rhythm erratic. Despite the medications keeping her stable, Dr. Sarah Martinez, one of the city's top cardiologists, had been blunt about the prognosis, without immediate surgery. Clara had weeks, maybe days. Richard hadn't left the hospital since they'd returned from Texas. He sat beside Clara's bed, studying her face for traces of Lillian, for signs of the baby he'd never gotten to hold. The resemblance was subtle, but unmistakable. The curve of her jaw, the way her eyebrows arched, even the stubborn set of her mouth that reminded him painfully of his wife. Madeline dozed fitfully in the chair on the other side of the bed, exhaustion finally overtaking her adrenaline. The past 48 hours had shattered everything she thought she knew about her life, and the emotional whiplash was taking its toll. The surgery will cost close to $500,000, Dr. Martinez had explained earlier. Her condition is complex. We're dealing with congenital defects complicated by years of inadequate medical care and what appears to be medication-induced damage. Richard had immediately offered to cover all expenses. But Dr. Martinez had looked uncomfortable. Mr. Holloway, there's been some Interference with the financial arrangements. Someone claiming to be Clara's legal guardian has frozen access to funds and is demanding psychiatric evaluation before any major medical decisions can be made. That someone could only be Evelyn Holloway. Now, as Clara's eyelids fluttered and she began to wake, Richard leaned forward anxiously. Her eyes were the same deep brown as Lillian's, but filled with confusion and pain. "Maddie." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Madeline jerked awake instantly. "I'm here, sweetie. How do you feel?" "Tired. Everything hurts." Clara's gaze shifted to Richard, and again he saw that flicker of recognition. "You stayed." "I'm not going anywhere," Richard promised. "Clara, do you remember what we talked about yesterday?" "About the ranch in Texas." Clara's face tightened with concentration. "Some of it. It's like trying to remember a nightmare. The harder I try, the more it slips away." Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway with a woman Richard didn't recognize. Elderly, with short gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "This is Dr. Helen Morrison," Dr. Martinez explained. "She specializes in recovered memory therapy, given Clara's traumatic past. We thought she might be able to help." Dr. Morrison pulled up a chair beside the bed. "Clara, I understand you've been having trouble with your memories from childhood. That's completely normal after trauma. Your mind was protecting you by blocking out painful experiences. But now I need to remember," Clara said with surprising determination. "People are saying my mother was alive longer than I thought. That she loved me." "She loved you very much," Richard said softly. "Both of you. She spent her whole life trying to find a way back to us." Dr. Morrison opened her notebook. "Clara, I'd like to try some simple exercises. Sometimes when we feel safe and supported, memories can surface naturally. Are you willing to try?" Over the next hour, Dr. Morrison guided Clara through breathing exercises and gentle questions about her earliest memories. At first, nothing came. Just fragments of images that didn't connect to anything concrete. But gradually, as Clara relaxed, the pieces began forming a coherent picture. "I remember a woman with white hair who was always angry," Clara said slowly. "She had cold hands and she smelled like expensive perfume. She told me my father had thrown us away because we were worthless." Richard's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What else do you remember about her?" "She said I was lucky she didn't put me in an orphanage like my sister. She said at least I was useful for something." Clara's breathing became more labored as the memories surfaced. "I had to take care of the horses, clean the house. If I did anything wrong, she'd take away my meals or lock me in the basement." Madeline reached for Clara's hand. "You don't have to." "No, I need to remember. Mama would be proud that I'm finally telling the truth." Clara's voice grew stronger. "Mama wasn't allowed to see me very much, especially after I got older. The white-haired woman said I was getting ideas above my station." "White-haired woman," Richard repeated grimly. "That's my mother, Evelyn Holloway. She had meetings sometimes," Clara continued, her eyes growing distant. "Important people would come to the ranch. She'd make me hide in the closet so they wouldn't see me, but I could hear them talking about business, about keeping secrets." Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "What kind of secrets? Names? Places where people were supposed to go. She had a book, a ledger, where she wrote everything down. Mama said it was proof of all the bad things she'd done." Richard felt his pulse quicken. "Clara, do you remember where your mother kept her important things?" "The papers Maria told us about." Clara closed her eyes, concentrating hard. "The locket," she whispered suddenly. "Mama said she put the most important thing in the locket, not just the picture, something else." Madeline's hand flew to her neck, touching the golden locket she'd worn for 20 years. "There's nothing else in here except your mother's photograph." "Look again," Clara urged. Mama was clever. She said the truth was hidden where the angry woman would never think to look. With trembling fingers, Madeline opened the locket and examined it more carefully. The photograph was mounted on what appeared to be solid backing, but as she pressed around the edges, she felt something give slightly. "There's something behind the picture," she breathed. Dr. Morrison produced a small pen light and magnifying glass from her medical bag. Under the bright light, they could see tiny hinges along one edge of the photograph. Mounting carefully, Richard used his fingernail to lift the hidden compartment. Inside, folded into an impossibly small square, was a piece of paper covered in tiny, careful handwriting. "My dearest daughters," Richard read aloud, his voice breaking. "If you are reading this, then God has finally answered my prayers and brought you back together. Richard, my beloved husband, I never stopped believing you were looking for us." Clara began to cry silently as Richard continued reading. "Evelyn has kept detailed records of everything. The bribes, the forged documents, the people she's hurt to keep us hidden. Look for the red leather journal in her office safe. The combination is your father's birthday, U815. She thinks I don't know, but I've been watching and listening for 20 years. She's giving us the evidence we need to destroy Evelyn," Madeline whispered. The letter continued with specific locations where Lillian had hidden documents throughout the ranch, detailed accounts of Dr. Peterson's illegal activities, and most damning of all, recordings she'd made using a small device Clara had smuggled to her from the main house. "There's more," Richard said, turning the paper over. "Clara, your mother wrote something special for you. My brave Clara, you are stronger than you know. The heart condition isn't your fault. It's from the medications Evelyn forced on both of us. Find Dr. James Chen in Houston. He has my real medical records, the ones that prove what she did to us." Dr. Martinez had been listening from the doorway, her face growing darker with each revelation. If this Dr. Peterson was administering unauthorized medications to pregnant women and children, we're talking about serious criminal charges, and if there are real medical records, we need to contact the FBI, Richard said grimly. "This isn't just kidnapping and false imprisonment anymore. It's systematic abuse, medical malpractice, conspiracy." But even as they planned their next moves, Clara was growing weaker. The excitement and stress of recovered memories were taking their toll on her damaged heart. "Mr. Holloway," Dr. Martinez said quietly, "we can't wait much longer for the surgery. With or without financial clearance. If we don't operate within the next 24 hours. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood. Richard pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 2 years. When the familiar voice answered, his tone was deadly calm. "Hello, Mother. We need to talk." The Holloway family mansion on Fifth Avenue stood like a fortress of old money and darker secrets, its limestone facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Richard hadn't set foot in this house for over a year, not since their last bitter argument about his wasted life and his refusal to remarry someone appropriate. Now, walking up the marble steps with Madeline beside him, he felt like he was entering enemy territory. Evelyn Holloway, at 71, still commanded attention when she entered a room. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, her Chanel suit immaculate, her blue eyes as cold and sharp as winter ice. She had been beautiful once, Richard remembered, but decades of cruelty had hardened her features into something predatory. "Richard," she said coolly, not bothering to rise from her antique French chair. "How dramatic of you to call with threats. And this must be the little cleaning girl who's been filling your head with fantasies." Madeline stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly, despite her simple clothes looking out of place in the opulent room. "My name is Madeline Keaton, Mrs. Holloway, though I think you know exactly who I really am. I know you're a gold digger who's seen an opportunity," Evelyn replied smoothly. "The resemblance to poor Lillian is remarkable. I'll give you that. Did you have plastic surgery? Or are you simply fortunate in your genetics?" Richard moved protectively in front of Madeline. "Stop it, Mother. We know everything. The ranch in Texas. What you did to Lillian. How you separated the twins." Evelyn's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, my dear boy. You know nothing. You never did have much imagination." She picked up a crystal paperweight from the side table, turning it slowly in her manicured hands. "Even if your wild theories were true, which they're not, what exactly do you think you can prove? Lillian died in Miami 20 years ago. The Coast Guard confirmed it. We have witnesses," Richard said. "Maria Santos worked at your ranch for 15 years. She saw everything." "Poor Maria. I heard she's been struggling with dementia lately. Tragic how the mind can play tricks on elderly people." Evelyn's smile was razor sharp. "I'm sure any decent attorney would question her reliability as a witness." Madeline felt ice forming in her stomach. "You can't just make people disappear." "Can I?" Evelyn set down the paperweight with deliberate care. "Dear child, You have no idea what I'm capable of. Money doesn't just buy comfort. It buys silence, loyalty, and when necessary, amnesia. Richard pulled out his phone and showed her the photo of Lillian's hidden letter. We found her final message, Mother. She documented everything you did. Names, dates, financial records. She even recorded conversations. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Evelyn's face, but it was gone so quickly Richard almost missed it. Recordings that allegedly exist somewhere, but that you don't actually have in your possession, she said dismissively. How convenient. We'll have them soon enough, Richard said. And when you do, it won't matter. Evelyn stood up, moving to the window that overlooked Central Park. Richard, you seem to have forgotten how our family's finances work. The trust your father established gives me complete discretionary control over 80% of the estate until I die or choose to transfer power. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. What are you saying? I'm saying that your monthly allowance, your hotel ownership shares, your bank accounts, all of it can disappear with a phone call. She turned back to face them, her expression triumphant. And there's a lovely clause in the trust about maintaining family dignity if you were to, say, publicly claim 2 bastard children and drag the Holloway name through the mud. You're bluffing, Madeline said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Evelyn walked to her desk and picked up a leather folder. I had my attorneys draft some papers this morning. 1 phone call, and Richard becomes just another failed businessman with more debts than assets. Where will your expensive medical care come from then? The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Richard stared at his mother. Finally understanding the full scope of her control, she hadn't just imprisoned Lillian. She'd imprisoned him too, using his love for his family as chains. There's more, Evelyn continued, clearly enjoying herself. The girl in the hospital. Clara, is it? I've spoken with her doctors, apparently. There are questions about her mental competency, given her traumatic history and memory problems. I've petitioned the court to have myself appointed as her legal guardian, pending psychiatric evaluation. She's not your responsibility, Richard said through gritted teeth. She's a disturbed young woman with no legal identity and no family. Someone needs to make medical decisions for her, and as a concerned citizen who's known about her unfortunate situation, I felt obligated to step forward. Evelyn's smile was pure poison. The court was very impressed with my charitable intentions. Madeline grabbed Richard's arm. She can't do this. Clara is my sister. Sister, Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Do you have any legal documentation proving that relationship? Birth certificates? Perhaps DNA tests? When Madeline remained silent, Evelyn nodded smugly. I thought not. We can get DNA tests, Richard said desperately. With whose permission, Clara is now legally under my guardianship. Any medical procedures require my consent. Evelyn returned to her chair, settling into it like a queen on her throne. And I'm afraid I don't see the need for such tests. The trap was perfect, and they all knew it. Evelyn had spent 20 years building an impenetrable web of legal protections, financial controls, and carefully placed allies. Even if they could prove everything, she had the resources to tie them up in court for years, while Clara died waiting for surgery. What do you want? Richard asked finally. I want you to stop this nonsense. Send the cleaning girl back to whatever gutter you found her in. Forget these ridiculous fantasies about lost children. Resume your proper place in society. Evelyn's voice became almost maternal. Richard, you're my son. I've protected you your entire life, even when you made foolish choices. I'm trying to protect you now. Protected me. Richard's voice rose. You destroyed my life. You took away my wife, my children. I saved you from a gold-digging nobody who would have ruined everything we've built. Evelyn's composure finally cracked. Lillian was pregnant by someone else when you married her. Those children were never yours. The lie hung in the air like a physical thing. Richard had heard his mother tell many lies over the years, but this one was different. This one came from a place of pure desperation. You're losing control of your own story, Madeline observed quietly. First, you said we were gold diggers pretending to be Lillian's children. Now you're saying we're really Lillian's children, just not Richard's. Which lie are you going with? Evelyn's eyes blazed with fury. Get out of my house. Gladly, Richard said, standing up. "But this isn't over, Mother. Clara is going to get her surgery, with or without your permission. And when she's recovered, she's going to remember everything you did to her and Lillian. If she lives that long," Evelyn said coldly. "I understand her condition is quite serious. Medical emergencies can be so unpredictable." The threat was clear, and Richard felt something snap inside him. His mother wasn't just protecting family money or reputation anymore. She was threatening to murder his daughter rather than lose control. As they left the mansion, Madeline was shaking with rage and fear. "She's going to try to hurt Clara, isn't she?" "Over my dead body," Richard said grimly. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus Webb. "Webb, it's Richard. I need round-the-clock security at the hospital. Starting immediately. And get me the best constitutional lawyer in the city. We're going to war." The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan buzzed with unusual activity as media vans lined the street outside. Word had leaked about the Holloway case, a story involving kidnapping, false imprisonment, and one of New York's most prominent families was irresistible to reporters. Inside courtroom 4B, the emergency hearing that would determine Clara's fate was about to begin. Richard sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, Margaret Chen, one of the city's most formidable civil rights lawyers. At 62, she had built her reputation destroying powerful people who abused the vulnerable. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her dark eyes missed nothing as she reviewed the mountain of evidence they'd assembled in just 3 days. Across the aisle, Evelyn Holloway commanded her own team of attorneys from the city's most expensive law firm. She looked serene and confident, every inch the concerned philanthropist who had stepped forward to help a troubled young woman. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams," the bailiff announced. Judge Williams was known for her no-nonsense approach and her particular hatred of family exploitation cases. At 55, she had seen enough human cruelty to last several lifetimes, and her reputation for harsh sentences preceded her into every courtroom. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the guardianship of Clara Doe," Judge Williams began, "also known as Clara Holloway, pending determination of her true identity. Mrs. Holloway, you claim this young woman requires psychiatric evaluation, and that you are the appropriate guardian." Evelyn's lead attorney, Harrison Blackwood, stood smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Holloway has been aware of this disturbed young woman for some time, and feels a moral obligation to ensure she receives proper care. The alleged father, Richard Holloway, has no legal standing, and appears to be suffering from his own psychological issues related to the death of his wife 20 years ago." "That's a lie," Madeline burst out from the gallery. Unable to contain herself, Judge Williams banged her gavel. "Order! Ms. Chen! Control your client or I'll have her removed." Margaret Chen stood up, her voice calm but carrying steel underneath. "Your Honor, we have substantial evidence that Clara is indeed Richard Holloway's daughter, and that she has been the victim of a 20-year conspiracy orchestrated by the defendant, Evelyn Holloway." "Substantial evidence," Blackwood scoffed. "They have the fantasies of a traumatized girl with documented memory problems, and the desperate hopes of a man who never accepted his wife's death." "We have more than that," Chen replied coolly. She gestured to Marcus Webb, who wheeled in a cart loaded with files and evidence boxes. "Your Honor, we've just returned from Texas with physical evidence, witness testimony, and documented proof of systematic criminal activity." Judge Williams leaned forward with interest. "Proceed." Chen opened the first file. 3 days ago, Mr. Webb and a team of investigators, accompanied by FBI agents, executed a search warrant at the Diamond Creek Ranch owned by Holloway Holdings. What they found was a 20-year crime scene that had been carefully preserved. She pulled out a series of photographs. "This is Lillian Holloway's room, exactly as it was left when she died 7 years ago. Personal items, clothing, even prescription bottles with dates spanning 2 decades. The room was locked and sealed, apparently maintained as some kind of shrine." Evelyn's composure flickered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "We also found this," Chen continued, producing a red leather journal, hidden in a wall safe in the ranch office. Just as Lillian's letter indicated, it contains 20 years of detailed records in Evelyn Holloway's own handwriting, documenting bribes paid to officials, medical personnel, and others involved in the conspiracy. Judge Williams accepted the journal and began reading, Her expression grew darker with each page. These are extremely detailed financial records. Payments to a Dr. Peterson, forged death certificates, bribes to Coast Guard officials. Dr. Peterson has been arrested, Chen added. He's provided a full confession in exchange for immunity. He administered unauthorized medications to both Lillian and Clara Holloway for years, causing the heart condition that now threatens Clara's life. Blackwood was on his feet. Your Honor, this journal could have been fabricated, without proper authentication. We have authentication, Chen interrupted. She nodded to Webb, who produced a small recording device. Lillian Holloway was more resourceful than her captor realized. Over the years, she secretly recorded dozens of conversations with Evelyn Holloway, Dr. Peterson, and others. Judge Williams looked skeptical. How did she manage that without being detected? Clara helped her, Chen explained. During the rare times she was allowed to visit her mother, Clara would smuggle small items back and forth. The recordings are date-stamped and include conversations that directly corroborate the written records. Chen pressed play on the device, and Evelyn's voice filled the courtroom. Captured from years ago, but crystal clear. The girl is getting too old, Peterson. People might start asking questions if they see her. Maybe it's time for an accident. Dr. Peterson's voice responded. Mrs. Holloway, I can't be party to murder. You've been party to everything else for 20 years. Don't develop a conscience now. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Evelyn's attorneys looked stunned. She had gone completely pale, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. There are hours of these recordings, Chen continued. Detailed discussions about forging documents, threatening witnesses, even planning Clara's eventual disappearance once she became inconvenient. Judge Williams turned her attention to Evelyn. Mrs. Holloway, do you wish to respond to these allegations? For the first time in her life, Evelyn Holloway seemed at a loss for words. Blackwood whispered urgently in her ear, but she just stared straight ahead, as if she couldn't quite believe her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. Your Honor, Chen pressed her advantage. We also have testimony from Maria Santos, corroborated by 2 other former ranch employees who were located by the FBI. All 3 have provided detailed accounts of the conditions at the ranch, Lillian's imprisonment, and Clara's treatment as an unpaid servant. Where are these witnesses? Judge Williams asked. In protective custody, Chen replied. There have been attempts to intimidate them, including threats to their families and suspicious break-ins at their homes. Webb stepped forward with another evidence box. We also recovered Lillian Holloway's personal effects from various hiding places throughout the ranch. Jewelry, photographs, and most importantly, medical records from her pregnancy that prove the twins were Richard Holloway's biological children. DNA tests confirm paternity, Chen added, producing lab results. Richard, Clara, and Madeline Holloway share genetic markers that prove their family relationship beyond any doubt. The weight of evidence was overwhelming. Judge Williams looked from the journal to the recordings to the DNA results, her expression growing more severe by the moment. Mrs. Holloway, she said finally, these are extremely serious criminal allegations. I'm ordering an immediate investigation by the FBI and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Your Honor, Blackwood tried desperately. My client is 71 years old and has been a pillar of the community for decades. These accusations are supported by substantial physical evidence and multiple witness testimony. Judge Williams cut him off. I'm immediately transferring guardianship of Clara Holloway to her biological father, Richard Holloway, and ordering that all medical decisions regarding her care be made without interference. She banged her gavel decisively. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Evelyn Holloway from having any contact with Clara or Madeline Holloway. Court officers, please escort Mrs. Holloway to the FBI field office for questioning. As federal agents moved toward Evelyn, she finally spoke, her voice filled with venom. You have no idea what you've done. That girl was better off as a servant than she'll ever be as a Holloway. At least I gave her purpose. Richard stood up, his face filled with disgust. You gave her 20 years of abuse and a damaged heart. That's not purpose. That's torture. As Evelyn was led away in handcuffs, she turned back once more. This isn't over. Richard, you'll never be free of me. Never. But for the first time in 20 years, Richard felt like freedom might actually be possible. The cardiac surgical suite at Mount Sinai hummed with quiet efficiency as Dr. Martinez and her team prepared for the most complex operation of their careers. Clara's condition had deteriorated rapidly since the court hearing, her damaged heart struggling to maintain the rhythm of life. Outside in the waiting area, Richard paced like a caged animal while Madeline sat motionless, clutching the golden locket that had started their journey. "Mr. Holloway," Dr. Martinez had explained hours earlier, "the surgery will take 8 to 10 hours. We're essentially rebuilding her entire cardiovascular system. The damage from years of toxic medications is extensive, but we believe we can give her a normal life expectancy. Now." As the surgery entered its 6th hour, Margaret Chen arrived with news that would change everything once again. "The FBI finished processing the evidence from the ranch," she announced, settling into a chair beside Richard. "What they found in Lillian's final hiding place is going to put Evelyn away for the rest of her life." She opened a sealed evidence bag and carefully withdrew a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and worn from handling. This was sewn into the lining of an old dress, buried in a trunk in the ranch's attic. It's dated just 3 days before Lillian died. Richard took the letter with trembling hands, his wife's familiar handwriting. Shaky but determined, covered both sides of the fragile paper. He began to read aloud, his voice breaking with each word. "My beloved Richard, Clara and Madeline, if you are reading this, then God has finally brought you together as I always prayed he would. I am writing this, knowing I may not live to see you reunited, but my heart is full of hope that someday you will find each other and learn the truth." Madeline moved closer, tears streaming down her face as she listened to her mother's words from beyond the grave. "Richard, my darling husband, not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you. When Evelyn took me from our honeymoon suite, I was carrying our babies, our perfect, beautiful daughters. She told me you had abandoned us, that you never wanted children, but I knew in my heart it was a lie. I knew you were searching for us." Richard had to stop reading, overwhelmed by the image of Lillian alone and pregnant, believing he might have abandoned her. Margaret Chen gently took the letter and continued. "She separated our girls immediately after birth. She told me Madeline had died, and for years I believed it. The grief nearly killed me, but Clara needed me to be strong. She was so small, so fragile, and Evelyn treated her like a servant from the moment she could walk. Clara discovered the truth about her sister when she was 12. Chen continued reading. "She overheard Evelyn talking to Dr. Peterson about the other brat in the city, and realized Madeline was alive. That's when we began planning. Not just Clara's escape, but our revenge." The letter detailed a meticulous plan that had taken years to execute. Lillian had trained Clara to memorize hiding places throughout the ranch, teaching her daughter to be a spy in her own prison. Every conversation with Evelyn, every meeting with corrupt officials, every cruel order had been carefully documented. Hidden beneath the floorboards in the stable office, you will find a metal box containing financial records that prove Evelyn's crimes go far beyond kidnapping. Chen read. She has been embezzling from the family trust for decades, using the money to pay bribes and maintain her network of corruption. The ranch was just one part of a much larger criminal enterprise. Richard's hands clenched into fists. His mother hadn't just destroyed his family. She had been stealing from him for years, using his own money to finance her cruelty. But perhaps most importantly, the letter continued, you will find evidence of other families she has destroyed. Evelyn has a sickness, a need to control and manipulate. Over the years, she has separated other children from their parents, destroyed other marriages, ruined other lives. The Red Journal contains names and details about at least 6 other cases. Margaret Chen looked up from the letter. The FBI confirmed this morning. They've identified 4 other families that were torn apart by Evelyn's manipulations. 2 other women who accidentally died during what should have been happy times in their lives. There are dozens of victims. How many people knew? Madeline asked, her voice hollow with grief and rage. How many people helped her do this? More than you'd want to believe, Chen replied grimly. But here's the thing. Lillian documented all of them. Names, dates, amounts paid. She turned herself into a one-woman intelligence operation. The letter's tone changed in the final paragraphs, becoming more personal and urgent. My precious daughters, I need you to know that everything I endured was worth it, because it led to this moment. The moment when you would finally have the truth, Clara. My brave girl, you are so much stronger than you know. The heart condition isn't your fault or some genetic curse. It's the result of the medications Evelyn forced on both of us to keep us weak and compliant. There is a doctor in Houston, Dr. James Chen, Margaret's brother, as it turns out, who has been secretly treating victims of medical abuse for years. He has copies of all the real medical records, the ones that prove what Evelyn and Dr. Peterson did to us. He can help Clara heal. Richard looked up at Margaret Chen with surprise. Your brother? I've been working this case for personal reasons, Chen admitted. My brother called me years ago about a mysterious patient, a woman who had been systematically poisoned with cardiac medications. He suspected abuse but couldn't prove it. When Lillian died, he kept copies of all her medical records, hoping someday he could get justice for her. The letter concluded, with words that broke everyone's hearts and filled them with hope simultaneously. Richard, my love, I need you to forgive yourself for not finding us sooner. Evelyn is brilliant and ruthless, and she had decades to perfect her lies. You couldn't have known, but now you do, and now you can make sure she never hurts another family. Clara and Madeline, my beautiful daughters, take care of each other. You have each other now, and you have your father's love. Build the life together that we never got to have. Be happy, be free, be everything I dreamed you could be. All my love, now and forever. Mama. The waiting room fell silent, except for the sound of quiet crying. After 20 years of questions, they finally had answers. After decades of manipulation and lies, they finally had the truth. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, still in her surgical scrubs, her face exhausted but smiling. The surgery was successful. Clara's heart is strong now, stronger than it's been since she was born. She's going to make a complete recovery. As they rushed toward the recovery room to see Clara, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years. Complete, overwhelming hope. His wife was gone, and nothing could bring back those lost decades. But his daughters were alive and safe. Evelyn's reign of terror was over. But outside in the hospital parking garage, a figure in expensive clothes sat in a luxury sedan. Making phone calls with desperate urgency, Evelyn Holloway had been released on bail pending trial, and she had no intention of going to prison. If she couldn't control her family, she would destroy them instead. The intensive care unit at Mount Sinai was quieter at 3 a.m, with only the soft beeping of monitors and the whispered conversations of night shift nurses breaking the silence. Clara had been recovering steadily for 4 days since her surgery, her color returning and her breathing easier than it had been in years. Richard hadn't left the hospital, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs and living on vending machine coffee. Unwilling to risk leaving his daughter unprotected, Madeline dozed in the reclining chair beside Clara's bed, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past week. The revelation of their mother's letter had brought closure, but also a crushing weight of grief for all the years they'd lost. Clara, though weak, had been lucid enough to hear about Lillian's final message, and the knowledge that their mother had loved them and fought for them had accelerated her healing in ways the doctors couldn't explain. Sometimes the heart heals faster when the soul is at peace, Dr. Martinez had observed, but peace was a fragile thing, and it was about to be shattered. The security guard Webb had hired for the night shift, a retired police officer named Frank Morrison, was making his rounds when he noticed something odd. The elevator to the cardiac floor had stopped twice in the past 10 minutes, but the doors had opened to empty corridors both times. His instincts, honed by 30 years of police work, told him something wasn't right. He radioed down to the main security desk. "This is Morrison on 15. Can you check the elevator logs? I'm seeing some unusual activity up here." The response crackled back through his earpiece. "Frank, we've got a problem. The service elevator has been overridden with an administrator's key card. Someone's in the building who shouldn't be." Morrison immediately headed toward Clara's room, his hand moving instinctively to the radio to call for backup. But as he rounded the corner, he saw a figure in a nurse's uniform entering room 1547, Clara's room. Inside, Evelyn Holloway stood over Clara's sleeping form, her face a mask of cold determination. She had traded her designer clothes for scrubs stolen from the hospital laundry, and her silver hair was hidden beneath a surgical cap. In her hand was a syringe filled with potassium chloride. a lethal dose that would stop Clara's heart in minutes and look like a natural complication from her surgery. 20 years I've been cleaning up your family's messes, she whispered to the unconscious girl. 20 years of protecting the Holloway name from scandal. I won't let it all be destroyed by a servant's daughter who should never have been born. She moved closer to Clara's IV line, the syringe steady in her experienced hands. Evelyn had learned a few things from Dr. Peterson over the years, including how to make murder look like medical misfortune. But as she reached for the IV port, Madeline's eyes snapped open. Some instinct, perhaps the same protective bond that had kept the sisters together through years of separation, had awakened her. "What are you doing?" Madeline whispered, instantly alert. Evelyn froze, then turned with a smile that belonged in nightmares. "Oh, good. You're awake. I wanted you to watch your sister die, just like I made Lillian watch her hopes die every single day." Madeline was on her feet instantly, positioning herself between Evelyn and Clara's bed. "You're not touching her. My dear girl, you have no idea what I'm capable of," Evelyn said, her voice conversational despite the deadly weapon in her hand. "I've been planning contingencies for this possibility ever since Richard started asking questions. If I can't have my family's reputation intact, then I'll make sure there's no family left to ruin it." She lunged toward Clara with the syringe, but Madeline was faster. Years of physical labor had made her strong and quick, and she caught Evelyn's wrist, struggling to keep the needle away from her sister. "Help!" Madeline screamed. "Someone help us!" The two women grappled in the cramped space beside Clara's bed, Evelyn fighting with the desperate strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. She might have been 71, but decades of yoga and personal trainers had kept her in excellent physical condition. "You ruined everything," Evelyn snarled, trying to break free from Madeline's grip. "Lillian seduced my son with her common blood, and now you're trying to steal what's left of our legacy." "Our legacy," Madeline gasped, maintaining her hold on Evelyn's wrist. "You mean your legacy of kidnapping and murder?" Clara's eyes fluttered open, disoriented by the commotion. The medical monitors began beeping frantically as her heart rate spiked from the stress. Frank Morrison burst through the door, followed by Richard and two hospital security guards. The scene that greeted them was surreal. Evelyn Holloway, one of New York's most prominent socialites, locked in a life-or-death struggle with a young woman half her age, while a deadly syringe hung suspended between them. "Drop the weapon!" Morrison shouted, drawing his service pistol. Evelyn's laugh was pure madness. "Weapon? This is medicine, officer. I'm simply providing care for a very sick girl." She made one final desperate attempt to reach Clara, breaking free from Madeline's grip for just a moment. But in her fury, she miscalculated. Her foot caught in the wires from Clara's monitors, and she stumbled backward. The marble steps of the hospital seemed to rise up to meet her as she fell, her head striking the corner of the metal bed frame with a sickening crack. The syringe flew from her hand, shattering harmlessly against the wall. Richard dropped to his knees beside his mother, but it was immediately clear that the injury was fatal. Blood pooled beneath her silver hair, and her blue eyes, once so cold and calculating, stared sightlessly at the ceiling. But even in death, Evelyn Holloway had one final cruelty to deliver. With her last breath, she whispered words that would haunt Richard forever. "I did it all for you, my son. Everything I did was to protect you from that woman and her bastards. I'd rather see my own blood die than watch our family fortune go to street trash." The room fell silent, except for Clara's labored breathing and the continued beeping of her monitors. Dr. Martinez arrived with a crash team, immediately checking Clara's vitals and ensuring the excitement hadn't damaged her surgical repairs. "She's stable," Dr. Martinez announced after several tense minutes. "Heart rhythm is returning to normal. The stress didn't cause any damage to the surgical site." As the medical team worked and police officers secured the scene, Richard sat in stunned silence. His mother was dead, killed by her own hatred and desperate need for control. Even facing prison and disgrace, she had chosen murder over acceptance. "She really would have killed Clara," Madeline said quietly, still shaking from the adrenaline. "She killed my wife," Richard replied, his voice hollow. "She stole 20 years from all of us, and right until the end, she believed she was the hero of the story." Clara reached out with a trembling hand, taking her father's fingers in hers. "It's over now," she whispered. She can't hurt anyone anymore. As dawn broke over New York City, the Holloway family was finally free from the woman who had terrorized them for 2 decades. But freedom, they were learning, came with its own weight of grief and the difficult task of rebuilding lives that had been shattered by cruelty. The nightmare was over, but the healing had only just begun. 6 months after Evelyn Holloway's death, spring arrived in New York with unusual warmth, as if the city itself was celebrating a new beginning. The cherry trees in Central Park bloomed with unprecedented beauty, their pink petals drifting like confetti through the windows of the penthouse apartment Richard had purchased for his daughters, a space filled with light and laughter that had been absent from Holloway properties for far too long. Clara stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Watching children play in the park below, her recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. Dr. Martinez called it the most successful cardiac reconstruction she'd ever performed, but everyone who knew Clara understood that her healing went far beyond the physical. The girl who had spent years believing she was worthless had blossomed into a confident young woman with her mother's gentle strength and her father's sharp intelligence. The physical therapy session went well today, Clara announced, as Richard and Madeline joined her at the window. Dr. Chen says I can start jogging next month if I keep improving at this rate. Richard smiled, still marveling at the simple pleasure of everyday conversations with his daughters. Your mother would be so proud of how strong you've become. The past 6 months had been a delicate dance of building relationships that should have existed for 20 years. There had been awkward moments, misunderstandings, and the occasional emotional breakdown as they all processed decades of trauma and loss. But slowly, carefully, they had begun to construct something that felt like family. Madeline had initially struggled with the transition from poverty to sudden wealth. The guilt of living in luxury while other young women still scrubbed hotel floors had nearly driven her to refuse Richard's support entirely. It was Clara who had helped her understand that accepting love and security wasn't a betrayal of her past. It was honoring their mother's sacrifice. I've been thinking about the ranch, Clara said quietly, a topic that had become less painful to discuss as the months passed. What we should do with it. The Diamond Creek Ranch had become the center of a legal nightmare. Evelyn's estate was tied up in criminal proceedings as federal investigators continued uncovering the full scope of her crimes. Richard had inherited control of the property, but none of them could imagine keeping a place that held so much suffering. I had an idea, Richard said carefully, but I wanted to discuss it with both of you first. He pulled out architectural drawings from his briefcase, spreading them across the dining table. The plans showed the ranch transformed, buildings demolished, landscapes redesigned, new construction that bore no resemblance to the prison it had been. A treatment center, Madeline breathed, studying the detailed blueprints, for families torn apart by abuse. The Lillian Holloway Center for Family Reunification, Richard explained. Therapy programs for recovered memory, legal aid for custody battles, medical care for victims of systematic abuse. Everything our family needed but couldn't find. Clara traced her finger along the plans, her eyes filling with tears. Mama would love this. She always said that pain should be turned into purpose. The center would be funded by the Holloway estate. Money that had been stolen from other families would be used to heal the wounds Evelyn had inflicted. It felt like justice, or at least the closest thing to justice they could achieve. Dr. Morrison has agreed to serve as the facility's chief psychiatrist, Richard continued. And Margaret Chen's brother James wants to establish a satellite clinic for treating medical abuse cases. What about Maria Santos? Clara asked. She helped save us. She should be part of this. Richard smiled. I already talked to her. She'll oversee the support programs for other survivors and their families. She says Lillian visited her in a dream and told her this was always the plan, as they discussed the details of their mother's memorial. The apartment filled with the kind of animated conversation that had been impossible when survival was their primary concern. Clara's laughter rang out freely, a sound that had been rare during her years of illness and fear. Madeline's voice carried new confidence as she suggested improvements to the center's design, based on her own experiences with social services. The doorbell interrupted their planning session. Richard opened the door to find Marcus Webb, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing an uncharacteristic grin. I have news, Webb announced. The last of Evelyn's co-conspirators just accepted plea deals. Dr. Peterson got 15 years, the corrupt officials got various sentences, and most importantly, The other families affected by her schemes are finally getting justice. He poured champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Clara, raising his glass in a toast. To the end of a 20-year investigation and the beginning of something beautiful. As they celebrated, Richard found himself studying his daughters with wonder. Clara had grown into a poised young woman who spoke passionately about starting college in the fall, planning to study social work so she could help other survivors. Madeline had enrolled in business classes, determined to learn how to properly manage the charitable foundation they were establishing in Lillian's name. "I want to show you something," Clara said suddenly, disappearing into her bedroom and returning with a small wooden box. "I've been working on this with my therapist." Inside the box were dozens of photographs. Images Clara had been slowly remembering and sketching from her childhood with Lillian. Some showed happier moments. Lillian braiding Clara's hair, teaching her to read, holding her during thunderstorms. Others captured the quiet acts of rebellion that had eventually led to their freedom. Lillian hiding papers, Clara memorizing locations, their secret smiles that told Evelyn they were stronger than she realized. "These are our real family photos," Clara said softly. "The memories she couldn't steal from us." Richard picked up a sketch of Lillian singing to a young Clara, and for a moment he could almost hear his wife's voice. The grief was still there. It always would be. But it no longer felt like drowning. Now it felt like love that would never die. "She's still with us," Madeline said, touching the locket she still wore every day. "Every time we choose love over hate, hope over despair, she's still with us." As evening approached, they stood together on the balcony, watching the sun set over the city that had witnessed so much pain and was now seeing so much healing. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, therapy sessions, legal meetings, construction planning for the center. But tonight, they were simply a father and his daughters, no longer defined by tragedy, but by the strength to overcome it. "Do you think she knows?" Clara asked quietly. "Do you think Mama knows that we found each other?" Richard put his arms around both his daughters, holding them close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I think she's been guiding us toward each other all along. Every decision we made, every moment of courage, every act of love. She was there, making sure we'd find our way home." The city lights twinkled below them like earthbound stars, and for the first time in 20 years, the future looked bright with possibility. 2 years had passed since that terrible night in the hospital, when Evelyn Holloway's reign of terror finally ended. The Texas morning was crisp and clear, as Richard, Clara, and Madeline stood before the white marble mausoleum that now graced the hill where the Diamond Creek Ranch's main house had once stood. Every trace of Evelyn's prison had been demolished, replaced by gardens of native wildflowers, and the elegant memorial that housed Lillian's remains. The Lillian Holloway Center for Family Reunification sprawled across the valley below them, its modern buildings gleaming in the sunlight. In just 18 months of operation, the center had reunited 47 families torn apart by various forms of abuse and manipulation. It had become a beacon of hope for people who had given up on ever finding their loved ones again. Clara, now 22 and radiant with health, placed a bouquet of white roses at the base of the mausoleum. Her recovery had been complete, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. She had graduated summa cum laude from Columbia with a degree in social work, and was already being courted by graduate programs across the country. But more importantly, she had found peace with her past and excitement for her future. "I brought something special today, Mama," Clara said softly, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "My acceptance letter to the doctorate program at Stanford. I'm going to study family trauma and recovery, specializing in cases like ours." Madeline stood beside her sister, now transformed from the frightened cleaning girl into a confident woman who managed the foundation with skill and passion that surprised even Richard. At 22, she had proven herself to be a natural leader, someone who could navigate complex legal and financial matters while never losing sight of the human element in their work. The center helped another family last week, Madeline reported to the marble stone that bore their mother's name. The Hendersons from California. Their daughter had been missing for 8 years, taken by her grandfather during a custody dispute. She's home now, thanks to the resources you inspired us to create. Richard listened to his daughters with profound gratitude and lingering sadness. At 43, he looked younger than he had in years. The burden of 20 years of grief finally lifted from his shoulders. The Holloway business empire had been restructured into a force for good, with hotels and properties generating profits that funded charitable work around the world. But no amount of success could fill the hole left by Lillian's absence. "I still dream about you," he said to the mausoleum, his voice carrying on the gentle breeze. "But they're happy dreams now. Dreams where you get to see how amazing our daughters have become." Inside the marble walls, Lillian's restored locket sat in a place of honor beside her urn. The golden chain caught the light streaming through stained glass windows that depicted scenes of reunion and healing, families embracing, children playing, love conquering darkness. It had been Clara's idea to include the locket as part of the permanent memorial, a symbol of the clues that had eventually led them back to each other. The three of them stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. The trauma of their separation would always be part of their story, but it no longer defined them. They had chosen to let love and hope be stronger than hatred and revenge. "I have something to confess," Richard said finally, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I've been carrying this around for months, waiting for the right moment." He pulled out a small velvet box, and both daughters immediately understood its significance. "You're going to propose to someone?" Clara asked with delight. "Dr. Martinez," Madeline guessed with a knowing smile. Richard laughed, a sound that came easily to him now. "Sarah and I have been seeing each other for 6 months. She saved Clara's life, and somehow she managed to save mine too. But I needed to come here first, to ask your mother's permission and your blessing." Dr. Sarah Martinez had indeed become much more than Clara's cardiac surgeon. Over the months of Clara's recovery, she and Richard had developed a friendship based on their shared commitment to healing, both medical and emotional. Their relationship had evolved slowly, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than desperate need or romantic fantasy. "Mama would love her," Clara said firmly. "Dr. Martinez has the same gentle strength that Mama had. She heals people because she cares about them, not because she wants power over them. She makes you smile the way you used to smile in the old family photos," Madeline added. "Before Evelyn stole your happiness?" Richard opened the velvet box to reveal an elegant but simple ring. Nothing like the ostentatious jewelry his mother would have chosen. "Sarah doesn't want a big wedding. She says she's too old for fairy tales. But I think we've all learned that real love doesn't need fanfare." As the afternoon wore on, they shared stories and memories, both painful and joyful. Clara talked about her upcoming research project on sibling bonds severed by trauma. Madeline described the new legal clinic they were opening to help families navigate custody battles and reunification processes. Richard spoke about his plans to expand the foundation internationally, creating centers in countries where family separation was used as a weapon of war or oppression. "We're going to make sure Evelyn's legacy is completely erased," Madeline said with quiet determination. "Every family she hurt will be healed. Every child she traumatized will find their way home." The sun was beginning to set when Clara pulled out the final surprise, a letter she had written but never intended to send. "I wrote this during one of my therapy sessions," she explained. "It's everything I wanted to say to Evelyn before she died. Dr. Morrison thought it might help me process my anger." She unfolded the paper and began to read. "Mrs. Holloway, you took 20 years from our family, but you couldn't take our capacity to love each other. You tried to make me believe I was worthless, but Mama's love made me strong. You thought money and power could control everything, but you forgot that truth is more powerful than lies." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I forgive you, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because hatred would make me like you. I choose to spend my life healing what you tried to break. I choose to prove that love is stronger than evil." When Clara finished reading, she carefully tore the letter into small pieces and let the Texas wind carry them away. The symbolic act felt like a final release from the prison Evelyn had built around their hearts. As darkness began to fall, Richard, Clara, and Madeline made their way back down the hill toward the center. Behind them, soft lights illuminated the mausoleum where Lillian rested in peace. Surrounded by the knowledge that her sacrifice had not been in vain, the gentle rain that began to fall felt like a blessing rather than a sorrow, drops of healing that washed away the last traces of their tormentor's influence. They walked together through the wildflower gardens, A family finally reunited by truth after decades of separation by lies. In the distance, the lights of the Lillian Holloway Center gleamed like stars, promising hope to other families still searching for their missing pieces, and somewhere in the Texas sky, perhaps a woman who had never stopped believing in love was finally at peace, knowing her children had found their way home.